Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Those of you into niche indie stuff might have heard of Star Wars. It's a thing about space wizards and incest, and people seem to like it. Because a couple of people are fans, video games have been made, and oh boy, there's a lot of games out there. More than 100 in fact. The games are definitely a mixed bunch, and pretty much every genre is covered. So in this video we're going to take a look at a very small portion of those games. I've deliberately left off ones based on specific movies for the most part, though there are a couple that are related to specific movies but are original stories based around them, if you know what I mean. Anyway, how about I shut up, you use the force to press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. We are going to start with Jedi Power Battles on the PlayStation 1. This takes place during Episode 1 and does loosely follow the plot of the film, making my statement earlier about showing games that don't follow the films kind of redundant. But it's not exactly the movie plot, there is a separate game for that. Anyway, the game here is essentially a 3D platform beat-em-up. From the start, you get to choose from 5 characters, which is cool. You've got Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, as well as Mace Windu, Adi Gallia, and Plo Koon, who I kind of recognise but couldn't tell you who they are. Well, apart from Mace Windu, he's the best. Doesn't matter who you play as though, as the characters are all very similar, though they do each have a few moves of their own and their own coloured lightsaber. Gameplay is simple enough. You go through various stages, each of which is based on a part of the movie, so you'll be in the Federation trade ship, down on planet Naboo, Tatooine, Coruscant, and so on. Your mission on each level is just to get to the end while fighting enemies and doing some tricky platforming. This is where most of the challenge comes in. There's often quite a few enemies after you at any one time. You've got battle droids, other droids, like those ones that roll around with a shield on, and so on, as well as various bits of wildlife and planetary locals that want to kill you, like the Tusken Raiders. You've got a few attacks. You can do a weak, medium and strong attack, each of which has its own combos, and the harder the attack, the slower it is to pull off. You can also run and double jump. Blocking and parrying is important here as well. You can deflect laser blasts back at enemies, and this is easy to do with the press of a button. However, the controls, which are fine, definitely could be smoother and more responsive. It is sometimes hard to pull off combos while in the middle of a fight. Killing enemies and smashing scenery gets you points, and it's worth getting as many as you can, as between levels you can buy new combos and increase your health and force powers. And the force powers here are handy. They are different for each of the characters, letting you do things like throw your lightsaber, give yourself a shield, power up your attacks, or do crazy combos and spins that take out loads of enemies. There's also power-ups in the levels giving you similar abilities for a short time. There's a big emphasis on platforming here, and this is probably the worst thing about the game. You will often have to do some precise jumps which can be very hard to judge thanks to the game's perspective and some stiff control, meaning you will fall down bottomless pits quite a lot. You get a few continues, but can be put back quite far, which is a bit of a pain. It doesn't look too bad with some standard PS1 graphics. The sound and music are great though, being right out of the movies, and who doesn't love the sound of a lightsaber? You can also play this in 2-player co-op, which I imagine would be a lot of fun. It is pretty tough though, but if you have a mate that likes challenges, and Star Wars, then you'll probably enjoy it. As we have the PS1 hooked up, here is Star Wars Demolition. This is a vehicular combat game that were all the rage in the early 2000s after the success of games like Twisted Metal and Vigilante 8. The story here, which is largely ignorable, is that Jabba the Hutt has set up a tournament where pilots and mercenaries from across the galaxy are pitted against one another in their vehicle of choice, and basically you're put in an arena and have to blow each other to bits. There's a few other game modes, but essentially everything comes down to shooting your opponents. There's a pretty decent roster of characters in the game. Now, I don't know if they're all proper Star Wars people, the only one I actually recognised was Boba Fett, but everyone else has a name so they might be just smaller characters, and I definitely did recognise all of the vehicles. That is all largely irrelevant though, as you are just choosing the vehicle that you want to drive, and there is a good variety. You've got snow speeders, Luke's thing that he has on Tatooine, forest speeder bikes, Boba's jetpack, an AT-AT, and even a Rancor, which is really cool. There's plenty to unlock here as well, which is always nice, and a good incentive to go through the various tournament modes so you can unlock them all. Each ship has its own stats in terms of speed, handling, health, weapons and so on, and they will have their own starting weapon, though it's basically a laser. Dotted around the arenas you will find power-ups. There are some that give you health and shields back, as well as a bunch of extra weapons that any character can use. You find homing missiles, tractor beams that pull enemies towards you, cloaks to make you invisible, pulse grenade things, thermal detonators and so on. Collecting these is the best way to win, as your basic weapons aren't very powerful unless you charge them up. You can also find areas where you can hang around to recharge your shields and weapon power. And speaking of the levels here, you do get a good variety. You've got a few familiar planets, so Tatooine, Hoth, Dagobah and so on will be here, as well as things like the Death Star. And there's plenty going on in the levels as well, with ruined buildings, swamps, and even other characters just having their own little battles that are nothing to do with the game in the background. It's pretty cool. Unfortunately, I just don't find this game all that fun to play. The variety in characters does seem great, but it also makes most of the game feel quite uneven, with some being noticeably weaker or worse to control than others. It doesn't look too bad, there is a fair bit of pop-in, but you do get a radar that lets you know where the other characters are. But I did often find that I would just blast enemies for ages and barely do any damage, then I'd take 2 or 3 hits and seem to explode. Maybe I just need more practice, but often it was more frustrating than fun. I definitely do recommend charging your weapons though, that's definitely the way to go. This is also available on the Dreamcast, and I am interested to try that version for the better graphics and just to see if it's any more fun to play. So yeah, I don't really recommend this one, but you never know, it might be fun in 2-player with a mate. Here is Star Wars Dark Forces Remastered from those fine folk at Night Dive Studios. I'm playing it here on my Steam Deck. You play as Rebel Alliance good boy Kyle Katarn, who goes on various missions for the Alliance to help them take down the evil Empire. The game starts with you infiltrating poorly guarded Imperial bases, which happen to be where they're keeping the plans for the Death Star. You find the plans and give them to the Alliance, ultimately letting them destroy the Death Star. Soon after, you're on some other mission and come across some intel talking about Dark Troopers, a new super soldier being developed by the Empire. So for the rest of the game, you'll be travelling the galaxy to find out more and trying to destroy their research and plans before the Dark Troopers are put into production. And honestly, I'd kind of like to see this as a film. As you know by now, this game is a first-person shooter that came out in the 90s, so has the classic gameplay of exploring some pretty large levels where you need to hunt down keys and look for doors and switches to progress, all the while taking on the dozens of bad guys in every level. But unlike the games out and around the same time as this, like Doom and Duke Nukem 3D, this one isn't just a case of getting to the end of the level. You actually have an objective to complete, usually 1 or 2 per level, but nothing major. And often the objectives are things like looking for an item or plans, rescuing a prisoner, destroying something, or maybe just planting a tracker device, that sort of thing. Once you've completed your objective, you can sometimes just exit levels in the menu to start the next one, though sometimes you will have to backtrack to the start of the stage where you began and your teammates will come and pick you up in your ship. There's plenty of enemies here, all of which you'll recognise if you're a fan. Of course, stormtroopers are the main fodder, but you also have a few aliens like Grands, Trandoshans, Gamorreans, and there's even an appearance from Boba Fett. Kyle is just a mercenary here, so there's no lightsaber action. Instead, you get a decent selection of guns and explosives. You've got a blaster, an Imperial blaster, thermal detonators, repeater rifles, grenade launchers, mines, and a few others. My favourite being the concussion rifle that the Trandoshans drop. It just looks really cool. All of the weapons are pretty handy, and most of them do have a secondary function, which is nice. You will likely find that you use the Imperial Blaster most of the time though, as it's fairly accurate and pretty powerful, and you almost always have a ton of ammo for it. There's a few of the weapons that I would rarely use, like the Plasma Cutter, which fires 5 green blobs. It's slow and uses ammo that another better weapon also uses. The missions themselves are very large and maze-like. I've actually owned this game on the PC since it was first released, and I played the hell out of it, but going back to it now for the remaster, I do realise that some of the mission layouts are a real pain in the ass and very confusing, with a couple of levels taking me nearly an hour to beat thanks to the confusing layouts and having to find switches that just look like regular parts of the scenery. Still, that doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, I still love this game. There are cool cartoony cutscenes, and there's something about the fast-paced movement that I really enjoy. It all looks great as well. The remaster does an excellent job tidying things up, and is by far the best way to play it. My mate had the PS1 version back in the day, and even back then I thought that one sucked. But if you do like old FPS games, then this was one that you really do want to check out. I wouldn't quite put it in the same category as games like Doom and Duke Nukem 3D, as it does play quite differently to them, but if you are into that sort of thing, you won't want to miss it. And of course, I should mention that this one spawned an entire sub-series, with the Jedi Knight games that came after it, and also star Kyle Katarn, which I'm sure we'll look at in a future video. Handheld Star Wars action now with Yoda Stories on the Game Boy Color. This is a very strange top-down adventure game that I would say plays kinda like Zelda if they only had 20 minutes to make a Zelda game. You play as Luke, and Yoda tells you that Han has got himself into some trouble, so you need to go rescue him. But as this is a video game, it's not that simple, and you've got to explore a medium-sized map looking for items and defeating enemies so you can fix your stuff and go fly to Han and get him. Now, I actually originally played this years ago on the PC as what I think was a free demo disc, and the Game Boy Color port isn't too much different, it's just had a few downgrades in the areas that you'd expect. And anyway, the PC version wasn't exactly good. So the idea here is that you explore the map and you'll come across various dead ends or find locked doors and characters that won't let you pass. Then you need to explore the other screens to find items, weapons or powers that you'll need to get through. But it's all very jerky. You move in squares, but there's no smooth animation. It literally is square by square and feels really odd. There's enemies all over the place and you can attack them with your lightsaber, but it's hard not to take damage and often you don't know when you're hitting them, there's no indication. They just eventually disappear. You can find other weapons like blasters, but these are also just kind of bad to use. Once you've dealt with the enemies, sometimes an item will appear that you need. Other times you'll need to solve some kind of simple puzzle or move some rocks out of the way to find things underneath them. Eventually you'll get what you need and you can go back to the other areas to use the item to make some progress. Pretty simple stuff. Trouble is, the game just doesn't really give you any indication of what you need to do, where you need to go, what you need to give to who, so unless you have a good memory or are taking notes, there'll be a lot of aimless wandering around. What is nice is that you can find a map station dotted around. These do actually tell you what areas need an item and what areas contain an item, and even which areas you haven't completed, so you don't waste your time going back there. But you can't access the map at any point, so again, you either need to remember, take a picture, or make some notes. Trouble is, it's just not very fun doing any of it. Now, I will admit that the more I played and got used to the bad controls, I did find I wanted to carry on, but not really because I was having a good time. Maybe I was hypnotised by the barely passable 30-second loop of the Star Wars theme that you'll be hearing for the entire game, who knows. And as you can see, the game doesn't exactly look impressive either. It's a very basic looking game. Arguably, it does look similar to a lot of top-down games of the era, but the jerky movement and almost zero animation on everything just really makes this feel like a super cheap game. This is probably one that's only for super fans and collectors, otherwise, keep away. Over to the PlayStation 2 now for Episode 1 Racer Revenge. I'm actually playing this on my PlayStation 5 though, after getting it from the store there. As you can probably guess, this is a racing game based on the pod racing sequence from Episode 1. There's no story or anything like that in here, it's just an arcade racer where you choose a character, then choose from a selection of cups to take part in, and you aim to be number 1. And actually, this game is really fun. You get a load of characters to choose from, all of which are from the movies. You've got Anakin Skywalker and a bunch of others that I recognise but don't know who the hell they are. And also, replaying these games really made me remember how stupid the names are in Star Wars. There's also a bunch of characters that you can unlock, including Sebulba, who I do remember from the movie. As you'd expect, each one has its own stats in terms of speed, acceleration, handling, shield, as well as boost, cooldown and repair. And yep, those things do make a difference. Choose what freak you want to play as, and then you choose from a decent selection of cups, each with their own courses on familiar Star Wars planets from across the galaxy, and then you get to racing. The variety in tracks is really good as well. You have desert tracks, swamps, skies, cities, industrial zones, snow courses and more. Each one is also pretty wide, letting you take corners nicely, and unlike some futuristic racing games, I didn't find myself banging into the sides every few seconds. And can I really call this a futuristic racing game as it's set a long time ago? Who knows. I will say though that the courses can be a little bland. They certainly look good, but there's never really a lot going on in them most of the time. There's very little in the way of hazards, jumps or strange things happening like, I don't know, TIE fighters shooting up the place, which would have been a nice touch. Though that might be a blessing as the game runs pretty fast and does have an excellent frame rate, so you will still be crashing into things, and if you take too much damage you will explode and you're out. Thankfully you can repair your vehicle as you're going along. You also have a boost at all times, although this does overheat, so you want to use it wisely as it can take a while to cool down. If you're playing the tournament mode, you can spend credits you've earned in races to upgrade your ship. You can basically upgrade all of its stats, each notch getting increasingly more expensive the better it is. But it's cool to upgrade these, and completionists will likely want to max out all the stats on their characters. It all looks decent, especially on the PS5 with some nice crisp PS2 graphics. The ship and character models all look great, and as mentioned, it plays very smoothly, which is essential for a game like this. You can also play in 2-player, and of course a game like this with a friend is always a good time. This is one that I would recommend. And finally for today, here is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I'm playing it again on the PS5. You are Cal, a scrapper on an Imperial planet. You're doing your usual scrapping duties and sorting out crashed ships when some evil Imperials arrive looking for someone. Some Siths are with them, and would you believe it, it turns out that you're a Jedi that they've been hunting. You manage to escape and are rescued by some random people with stupid names, and then more Star Wars type stuff happens, with some predictable plot twists on who the bad guys really are and all that. It's a fun enough story though, and it's very Star Wars. Then the game sees you travelling to various planets in order to relearn the things you've forgotten about being a Jedi, and finding out why you're so important to all the plans. The game is an action-adventure that a lot of people say is kind of like the Star Wars version of Dark Souls, and I can definitely see why. It's definitely taken inspiration in a few ways, but is nowhere near as tough. The combat here is a big focus, and your only weapon is a lightsaber. You have a handful of combos and moves that you can do, and killing enemies gives you experience and you eventually gain skill points. To use the skill points though, you've got to go to specific meditation spots. It's here that you can upgrade your powers to get new ones and so on. You can also rest, which gives you all your health back, but doing this also makes any enemies you defeated respawn, hence the Dark Souls influence. Also, if you die before cashing in your skill points, you lose them, but if you do manage to find the enemy that killed you when you have respawned, you can attack them to get your experience and skill points back. Again, like when you lose your souls in Dark Souls. Though to be fair, those really are the only things that are similar. The combat is very pattern-based though, and you will want to take your time even with some of the weaker enemies, as they are all pretty good at blocking and countering your attacks, so you want to be sure to do the same to them. Timing blocks lets you parry, and sometimes even kill large enemies in a single hit, which is really satisfying. There's plenty of bosses as well, and these are pretty tough. You'll really want to learn their patterns, and don't be afraid to die a few times to figure them out. As well as fighting, you'll explore a number of planets. These are all pretty large and packed with hidden areas, items and secrets. Finding these will give you more XP, and there's a ton of chests to find as well, though these are pretty disappointing. Chests pretty much always contain new skins for your lightsaber, poncho or spaceship, though none of them are particularly appealing and none of them change your stats or anything, so unless you want to 100% the game, there's really no reason to collect any of the chests. You'll also need to revisit planets with new abilities once you've unlocked them as well if you want to get everything. Thankfully, getting around is fun, thanks to your force powers and some pretty good platforming. You can run, jump, double jump and use the force to push and pull items towards and away from you, making a lot of the platforming sections pretty fun. I really like the variety in the planets as well. There's not a lot of them, but each one is quite unique, with some nice set pieces. I especially like the first time you go to Kashyyyk, and there's a fantastic section with the ATSTs. Sadly, I wasn't recording the footage at that point. Something else worth noting is that the developers for the game really seem to like sliding sections. Every planet has some in-your-face sections where you're sliding down some mud, water or ice. Not sure why they thought they needed to include it so much, but hey, it's fine. Also, they seem to love that loading trick where you're slowly moving through a narrow gap. That happens a lot here, and it's really noticeable, but though I would rather have that than a boring loading screen. Each planet also has its own set of locals that want to kill you, as well as the usual Empire bastards. It all looks great though. I really like the graphics here. The environments especially are brilliant, and it runs at a sexy 60 FPS on the PS5. Thanks to my friend Chris for telling me about performance mode in the options. I'm getting close to the end of this one, and I am really having a good time. It's not perfect, with some strange glitches like enemies suddenly flying into the air when I attack them, and some animations just not happening while jumping or running, but they're all silly things and nothing that's affected the actual gameplay. Overall though, this is an excellent game, and I'll definitely be looking to pick up the sequel when I finish this one that I highly recommend. So there you go, a handful of Star Wars games that you might want to try. What's your favourite Star Wars game? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. I must have at least another 20 or so of them on various consoles and PC, so I'm sure this is a topic I could end up doing a whole series on. I'd like to thank my sexy patron, and if you'd like to become a patron where I have even more content, including reviews for games too hot for YouTube, podcasts, gaming challenges and more, then check out the link in the description below. On screen now you can see where you can follow me, so why not do so? There's plenty more content for everyone to enjoy. And now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and may the Force be with you.